And so we come now to the end. I've just finished The Return of the King, Part 3 of The Lord of the Rings. And wow, this one was by far my favorite. And I was trying to think of why that was. And I think it's because this is not book 3, it is part 3. So a lot of trilogies, meaning 3 books with one continuous story, follow the sort of rules that each book has its own introduction, rising action, conclusion, climax, and conclusion. And so we sort of have that arc throughout all 3 books. Whereas with Lord of the Rings, I think it's one continuous arc. And this 3rd book, it doesn't have an introduction, a rising action. It goes straight to we are at the climax and just non-stop action and excitement and adventure, and it happens very early in the book. About halfway through the book we're at the main climax, and then the remainder half of the book is sort of epilogue, resolution, wrapping up this whole epic story. And yeah, I could not put this down. I sat down and I read the first half of the book in one sitting. And I complained earlier that the other books felt dry and didn't have as much emotion, but for whatever reason I saw so much in this one. I was so moved, and there were even parts that I thought were very, very funny. And even knowing what was to come, like a lot of people complain about spoilers. No, I don't want to be spoiled by something. But if a piece of media requires you to not know about it in advance, and it's just the twist or the revelation of the plot that makes it enjoyable, I don't think that's as good of a thing as a piece of art where if you know the whole thing and you know what's coming and you know all the plot twists and all the story elements, and yet you're still looking forward to them and are still enjoying them, then that, like I said, that is a real piece of art. And that's what this whole book, whole series, it's weird to call it a series. Lord of the Rings is not a series, it's a book. This whole book is amazing. And I finished it around midnight on the or what became the 3rd of January, which is Tolkien's birthday, and I thought that was really sort of a weird coincidence. And also, as I finished it, it was a full moon, and there had been a big snowfall a few days before, but the sky was completely clear, there was no wind, it was completely silent, and where I live, there's no lights, there's no traffic, nothing like that. So I just I lay down, I had the curtain open, and just the silver light of the full moon blazing into my room, and the complete silence, and the stars behind it, and it's really striking just how bright a full moon is and how moonlight is. Like, it literally casts shadows. It's that bright. Like, it just felt like a very Tolkien moment. The whole world turned to silver glass and very peaceful, tranquil, elven. I don't know, it was an incredible experience after the emotions of going through this whole book. So this part of the book, The Return of the King, is the shortest of all 3. It's only about 300 pages. And then following it is over 100 pages of appendices. Just kind of neat. They're more historical stuff, genealogical, some like really obscure stuff about calendars and about translation and dating. But I love how it's all written as if this is a true story, and it's written as if the author is a historian explaining how he translated The Lord of the Rings into English for the modern audience, and even how he translated the names. Because you think, like, why do we have Aragorn and Frodo, but then a guy named Sam? Turns out Sam's real name is Banazir. But Banazir in the speech of the hobbits translates to something more similar to Samwise. Anyways, the appendices have sort of all kinds of extra lore, and it's interesting that it sort of tells the story of what happens to the characters after the events of Lord of the Rings, which is really interesting. We'll get to that. But for the plot itself, it picks up right after the Two Towers, of course, and follows, starting with Gandalf and Pippin. Gandalf takes Pippin with him and goes down to Minas Tirith. They're trying to get there quickly to sort of prepare for the oncoming onslaught of Mordor and Sauron. And as they're racing down to Gondor, they see all of the beacons lit on the mountaintops, which is sort of signaling to all of Gondor's allies, like Gondor is at war, everyone needs to show up. So a bit different than the films. But we get to Gondor, and we're introduced to Denethor, the steward of Gondor, he's not the king, of course, but he's sort of in place of the king. And he's a really interesting character. The actor John Noble, who plays him in the films, I adore John Noble. He's one of my favorite actors. But he is a different sort of character in the books. He's very wise and learned and powerful, and it's revealed that he's been going about fully armed and armored because he's preparing for war, and he's doing everything he can to sort of protect his city, and he is very wise and like I said, he's very wise. He sort of can see the future a little bit, or sort of predict what's going to happen, and so he's trying to do everything he can to sort of find that narrow gap, that one future where Gondor will survive. He knows about Boromir's death, and he asks Pippin to relate it to him. Pippin then swears himself into the service of Minas Tirith, which Gandalf's like, hey, that was a good move, but now you actually have to, do stuff as a servant of Gondor. It's revealed a bit later that one of the seeing stones, the Palantir, is in Minas Tirith, and Denethor has been using this to sort of see around the countryside and see what's happening. But also, of course, because Sauron has one, that they've sort of been in contact, and Denethor's strong enough to hold his own against Sauron, but he's still sort of doubts have been creeping in because of that, and that sort of leads to his downfall later in the book. There's a really interesting scene where Pippin goes off with some of the children of Minas Tirith, and he shows them around, and I think that's really neat, because I think that's the only time we have children's POVs, or not children's voices and children in the story, and it was a really, really cool scene. It felt different. I don't know, this book, for whatever reason, felt different, even though it's only the third part of this one large book. It had scenes like this that just seemed different to me, in a good way. Then we jump back to Rohan, and we follow Aragorn. So out of the north come more of the Dunedain, these rangers of the north that Aragorn had been chieftain of, and that's sort of where he came from, and they have come north with this, it's revealed later to be a banner, but it's furled for now, and something that they say that Arwen has made for Aragorn, and they'll reveal it in due time. But there's about 30 of them, and think of like 30 people like Aragorn. Like, these are like powerful, strong, knightly characters that are really going to help out in the war. So Aragorn's kind of debating what to do and how he's going to defend Minas Tirith and what he's going to do to help this war against Sauron. The rest of the Rohirrim are going to Dunharrow and where Éowyn and the women and children are, and then to Edoras, and they're getting everyone together. Then they're just going to head east to try and defend Minas Tirith. But among these Dunedain are two of Elrond's sons, Elrohir and Eladar, I think are their names. They're not in the films at all, so I don't really know much about them. I don't even know if they're like elf or human. Throughout this whole book, I was really confused about whether Elrond, because he's Elrond half elven, right? His mother was an elf and his father was human. I think his father was Irendil. So he's half elven, so he's not really an elf, but he chose the sort of path of the elves, and so he's kept the wisdom and age of the elves. Anyways, his two children, his two sons, I should say, are with Aragorn as well, and they sort of tell him, hey, now's the time you have to take the paths of the dead. And that's when we're introduced to this. What is this Paths of the Dead? Turns out way back thousands of years ago, when Isildur first went to fight against Sauron, he called up all of the people who had sworn oaths to him, because he's the High King, right? So he called up all the other kingdoms and peoples to come fight for them. But these people from, I can't remember the name of the place, near Dunharrow, they refused to come. And so Isildur cursed them to never rest until they fulfill their oaths. And so it basically like spooky ghost people that have been existing for thousands of years, waiting for the chance to fulfill the oath to serve Isildur and his heirs in their fight against Sauron. So Aragorn's like, as Isildur's heir, I'm going to go down, I'm going to get those guys to fight for me. And I think at this time he's also heard that Gondor is under siege by these corsairs from the south, and they've sort of blocked up the main port. And because of that, a lot of the soldiers of Gondor can't get to Minas Tirith to defend it. They've got to stay and defend this port and fight these corsairs. So it's really split Gondor's forces in half, which is not good when Sauron's pushing all his might to destroy Minas Tirith. So he's like, I will get these ghost soldiers, we're going to go fight these corsairs. And so he does. They go through this really creepy, spooky, undead tunnel, and Gimli's like super terrified to go in, but Legolas is like, I'm not afraid of the ghosts of men. And so he's like, well, if Legolas is going in, I'm a dwarf, I should be able to go in as well, and goes in. A little bit about their relationship. So I didn't mention that they had sort of made this pact that behind Helm's Deep, back during the Battle of Helm's Deep, there was all these caves, these glittering caves. I can't remember the name of them, but Gimli thought that was the most beautiful thing ever. And he's like, Legolas, you've got to check this out. I know you're an elf and you love your trees and stuff, but like these caves, you have to see this. It's incredible. And Legolas is like, you know what? I'll do it, but you have to come with me to Fangorn after this whole thing. We got to check out Fangorn because it's like one of the oldest forests ever, and those trees, and it's amazing. I want you with me. And Gimli's like, well, I'm a dwarf. I don't really care about trees and stuff, but hey, if you go to those caves, I'll go to the forest. So they made this kind of cool pact. They also had this cute thing, again, the last book, at the Battle of Helm's Deep, when they were sort of counting how many orcs they killed. And I think Gimli came out on top by one, which that's in the film as well, as sort of a goofy, silly thing, but it's actually in the books too, so that's cool. Anyway, so Gimli, Legolas, the Dunedain, and the Sons of Elrond go through the Paths of the Dead and come to this meeting place where Aragorn calls them forth to fulfill their oaths. And like everyone throughout the countryside is like running inside and shutting the doors because like the dead have risen, but Aragorn's just like grim and kind of angry, and he's just like, let's go. And him and the Grey Company, they call themselves, which I love. I think that's so cool. Like if I ever travel with a group of people, I have to come up with a name, like the Nine Walkers, the Fellowship of the Ring, the Grey Company, and they travel like lightning speed day and night to get to this port with this ghost army behind him. And did they succeed? Did they not succeed? What happens when they got there? We find that out much later. But again, so I said this in the last video, but Tolkien has this wonderful way of splitting the narrative and leaving you in suspense, and then jumping to another narrative, and then having the revelation, and then going back and explaining how we got there. And masterful the way he does that. The building up of suspense and the relief is just so good. Anyways, then we're jumping back to Rohan and the Rohirrim all mustering, and Merry, who has sworn himself to Theoden as a servant of Rohan, almost equal to the way that Pippin has sworn himself to Gondor. But Theoden sort of doesn't bar him from going to war with them, but he's like, you're a hobbit, like you have a pony, you can't keep up with our horses. We're going to be traveling day and night to try and get to Gondor. And Merry's really bummed about this, naturally. But there's someone else who's also really bummed about the whole situation, and that's of course Éowyn. So Éowyn's a phenomenal character. She sees herself as a warrior woman, as the shield maiden of Rohan, and she wants to go to war. She almost wants to die in battle, and she thinks it's not fair at all that the men can go and fight and she's not allowed to. And so she does the classic thing that women in antiquity or in the past would do, and dresses up as a man and takes Merry with her and sort of hides Merry for a bit and sneaks him off to war. And he doesn't know it's Éowyn this whole time. He thinks it's this man, really young man or old boy called Durnhelm, and travels with him off to war. We then jump to the actual siege of Gondor. Like I said, this is fast paced, like boom, boom, boom. So now Gondor is under siege by the forces of Sauron, not just orcs, but men as well. So I said there's a lot like good and evil in this world. It's a very black and white world, and so the men that are fighting, and I use the word men as like an ungendered term, I think they are all male. The men from Harad and from the east and the south. It's really interesting though, in the last book, I think I forgot to mention this, but Frodo and Sam come across one of the bodies of these Easterlings, these other men that one of Faramir's Gondorians, one of Faramir's rangers had killed. And Sam sort of reflects on this corpse, like, was this man really evil? He served Sauron, but like as an individual, like, did he have a family? Was he forced to go? Does he have people that he loves? Does he have people that will miss him? Like, takes a very humanist, sort of compassionate look at this body of this soldier and reflects. And I have to think, like, Tolkien being a soldier in the First World War, that he might have had this same sort of opinion coming across the body of a German soldier and thinking, like, is this really the enemy? Like, are we enemies? Is this an evil person and am I good? Like, very nuanced and interesting, especially in this world of black and white, good and evil. Anyway, so all these forces are attacking Gondor, attacking Minas Tirith, and the city is besieged. They do not have as many soldiers as they would hope. In fact, they bring up Grond, this battering ram that they forged, and destroy the gates of Minas Tirith. And who's leading them? Of course, the Ringwraith, the Lord of the Nazgul, the Witch King of Angmar, the captain of the Black Riders, the super evil dude. And he marches up to the gates of Minas Tirith that have been broken, and Gandalf rushes down to try and face him. And that's when you hear horns. The horns of Rohan. For this whole time, they've called for Rohan. They're waiting for Rohan to come and sort of reinforce them with their heavy cavalry, and it hasn't happened. Now Denethor, despairing that the Rohirrim have not come, has really broken down, and he has sent Faramir out time and again to try and retake Osgiliath or do something, and Faramir finally comes back wounded with an arrow and seemingly close to death, and he's got a fever, so he's burning up, and Denethor sort of says like, look, my line is ended, it's over, I've lost all hope. And he tries to then burn himself and Faramir. He takes them and says, we will burn like the heathen kings of old, no tomb will hold our bodies. And Pippin's like, this is not right, Faramir is not dead, like what is going on? And rushes out to get Gandalf. And of course this is when Gandalf's about to have this showdown with the Nazgul, and then the horns and the Rohirrim have arrived, and it's just, you get just chills thinking about it. It's very Vienna. What was it? The winged hussars arrived and swept down and saved the city of Vienna from the Ottomans. So then, of course, like I said, we have to jump back and explain, well, how did the Rohirrim get here? And we follow them traveling east, trying to reach Minas Tirith, and there's of course an army of orcs in their way because Sauron is sort of planning to block them. But then we meet these sort of the wild people of the woods, or the wild men of the woods, which are really interesting sort of people. To me, they're sort of, if the Rohirrim are Anglo-Saxons, and these are sort of the Celts. These are the indigenous people of this land, and they're very different. They're described as having a very different language. A lot of these old stone statues and weird sort of monuments and stuff that are crumbling ruins are attributed to them. They don't have a major role, but they're really cool, in my opinion. And they reveal that, hey, there's an army in the way, but we know a secret path that will get you around to Minas Tirith past this army. So the cavalry managed to get through there and arrive as Minas Tirith is starting to burn and starting to be overrun. And then we have the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the great battle before Minas Tirith. So Pippin managed to get to Gandalf in time, and Gandalf's looking out and he sees the Rohirrim and he can sort of sense what's coming, and he's like, I need to get out there and defeat the Witch King. Like, if I don't, bad things are going to happen. But Pippin's like, if you don't save Faramir, Faramir is going to be burned alive by his father. And so Gandalf's sort of really torn, and he's like, he has to make a really hard choice, and he decides he's going to go back and save Faramir, because if he doesn't do that, no one will, and maybe something on the battle will happen with the Witch King. And so he goes back and he manages to save Faramir, but as he does so, Denethor then self-immolates and burns himself alive and dies, and Faramir is now technically the steward, but he's still unconscious, and so he's taken to the houses of healing, sort of a hospital area where he can be looked after, and that's sort of Gandalf's part of the battle done. Meanwhile, out on the actual field, the Rohirrim sweep in and smash through all of these enemies, and there's one that has like this banner of a serpent. I think he's a men of Harad, so like this great chieftain or king or leader of men from this distant kingdom, and Theoden fights him in combat and manages to slay him. So remember, Theoden's quite old at this time, but he sort of has this glorious moment of victory on the battlefield. But of course, as he's having this victory, then the Nazgul shows up, the Ring Wraith, the Witch King, and on his flying mount manages to sort of grab Theoden and his horse and throw them so that Theoden's horse falls on him and crushes him, which will eventually kill him. So it's tragic that Theoden's killed by his horse. Kind of ironic in a way, although I don't like using the term irony to describe the death of Theoden. But anyways, who's nearby? Of course, this young boy, Durnhelm, and Merry. And Durnhelm gets off and challenges this Nazgul, and it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. It brought me to tears, and it's much like it was in the films. So despite all the terror and the horror and the fear that this evil being exudes, Éowyn stands her ground and will not let this Nazgul near the body. And when the Nazgul goes for the body, she cuts its head off and kills it, which then the Witch King rises and like, how dare you, and stomps towards her and says that no man will kill me, which a lot of people joke like, oh, it's semantics that she managed to win, but it's actually this sort of prophecy that thousands of years ago, when the Witch King was in another battle, he was defeated and he fled, and as he fled, some of these men wanted to chase him down and finish him off, but this elf, I think it was Glorfindel, actually said like, however he will end, it will not be at the hands of man. So he sort of made it seem like it's a prophecy. It's sort of like men will never be the ones to defeat this. It makes it sound like some sort of otherworldly force or some maybe natural disaster will destroy this creature. But what Glorfindel was sort of really prophesizing was that he will not die by the hands of man, he will die by the hands of woman. So it's it's not a weird semantic thing like, haha, loophole, you can't die by men. Well, actually, you can die by women. No, it was sort of a prophecy that foretold this. But as he says, no man can kill me, and sort of smashes his, I think he has a mace or morning stars or flails or something onto Eowyn's shield arm, shattering her shield arm. Merry, coming from behind with his barrow sword, stabs into, I think, the back of the knee of the Witch King, which makes him sort of surge forward and fall, because of course the barrow sword would have been forged in the kingdom of Arnor, where the people were fighting against the Witch King, and so it had been made to fight this being. And as he stumbles, Éowyn reveals herself and says, of course, I am no man, and stabs the Witch King through the face, which utterly destroys it. But of course, the evil force that sort of vibrates through her sword arm and through Merry's sword arm sort of knocks them unconscious. And it's such a beautiful scene, and Éomer rushes to the scene, and Theoden lies dying, but is still conscious enough and says, like, Éomer, I name you king, like, and then he says, Éomer, you are now king, and then sort of says his goodbye, but his final words are like, or say goodbye to Éowyn for me, or something but Éowyn. And then he passes, and then Éomer sort of looks and sees, like, beside him, there's Éowyn lying seemingly dead, and he's just in such a rage and anguish that he just, like, starts screaming death like they do in the books, and just charges off recklessly and starts fighting the battle again. And some of the other people arrive. There's this Prince Imrahil, who's not in the films. He's kinsman of Denethor. I don't know I thought he was Denethor's younger brother, but he's sort of the prince of that port town that's under siege. He's a very important captain of men of Gondor, one of the higher ups. He's sort of like leading, after Denethor's kind of given up, he's the one sort of leading the defense of Minas Tirith. He comes across Éowyn and he's like, well, she's not dead. We need to get her to the Houses of Healing. So they pick her up and Merry as well and take them back to Minas Tirith. And then the moment, like, I'm emotional having read that, and then the next moment is, to me, is so good. Like, Éomer's running off in utter despair, but the battle seems to be going well. And then they see black ships coming up the river. It's the Corsairs, and they're like, oh no, the Corsairs are going to reinforce, like, we're going to be overrun. Like, everyone's seeing these Corsairs coming, and all the men of Gondor and Rohan, they're looking on, and they're just, like, grim. It is a grim situation. And then as one of the lead ships turns the bend, the banner that Arwen had created and sent with the Sons of Elrond for Aragorn is unfurled on the lead ship, and it's the banner of the King of Gondor. It's the white tree on sable with the crown, and the banner itself has been made with mithril, so it shines and it glows. And this is a banner that hasn't been seen in Gondor for hundreds or thousands of years, and it's just like instant hope that they thought they were going to be overrun, and suddenly the king has returned. And of course, Aragorn and the Dunedain and the Sons of Elrond and Legolas and Gimli and all the troops he managed to rally from the battle with the Corsairs, all these men of Gondor are fresh and rush onto the battlefield. And like a hammer and an anvil, the Rohirrim and the men of Gondor meet and crush the enemy in between them. And Aragorn and Éomer get to fight alongside once more, and it's just such a powerful moment, which of course will have you in tears again. And again, so we have to reveal, how did we get there? So Aragorn tells of how they fought the battle, and all these ghosts people, the dead, the Oathbreakers, helped them destroy the Corsairs and take their ships. And then Aragorn saw that they fulfilled their oaths and allowed them to rest and pass into nothingness. And then he, like I said, he gathered up all the remaining defenders of Gondor and took to the ships and sailed up to the aid of Minas Tirith. It's just like, what a scene. I don't think the film does that well. I think the film, the boats show up and the orcs are expecting, oh yeah, here's our reinforcements. About time they showed up, and then like Aragorn jumps off, and then a whole bunch of ghosts come out, because in the films the ghosts come with them. And then it's like kind of dumb that the ghosts can just sort of kill everything. But in the books, it's incredible moment just seeing that banner. Yeah, wow. Anyways, and that's the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. And then next, to sort of calm ourselves down, we have some scenes when Aragorn, he doesn't want to enter the city yet. He doesn't want to declare himself to be the king and whatnot. He's like, we need to deal with Sauron first. We're not done yet. He reveals that he had used the Palantir because he had been given the one by Gandalf from Orthanc. He used that Palantir to reveal himself to Sauron and to say, like, I'm here and I'm coming for you. So Sauron sort of, especially after this defeat on Pelennor, he's sort of fixed on Minas Tirith, on Aragorn, and it's like, what is coming next? And so Aragorn, he's trying to come up with a plan, but first he does actually have to come into the city because there's people that need healing, and there's sort of this prophecy that the king will be known by his healing hands or something. And people like Éowyn and Merry, who have been wounded by these ring wraiths, there's no way to heal them except for the healing hands of Aragorn, who has sort of kind of magical powers because he's of the line of Elendil, and so he comes in and he's he's asking for this herb, Kingsfoil, Athelas, and it's a really funny scene. So one of the women there is like just like a chatterbox, and she's just chatting his ear off and talking to him about the lore of these herbs and of healing and this, and he's like, woman, just shut up and give me the herbs. Like, he doesn't talk like in a misogynistic way towards her, but it's really funny, and she like brings in the sort of the head of the House of Healing, the sort of head doctor or whatever, and then he goes into the sort of lore and expounding upon the virtues of healing and histories, and Aragorn's just like, guys, just shut up, like, we need to heal these people, go get the stupid leaves for me. And it is a very comical scene that I didn't really expect from Tolkien. It feels very different than a lot of the rest of the books, but really good sort of mood switch after like palate cleanser after what we just went through. And so Aragorn's able to heal Merry and Éowyn and Faramir, and there's a really nice reunion between Merry and Pippin, very wholesome. Although I think in the film it's kind of better, where Pippin finds Merry sort of half under this elephant on the battlefield. So then they debate what are they going to do next, and Gandalf's like, look, Frodo and Sam, they're still out there. They still have the ring. They are trying to get into Mount Doom in the middle of Mordor. We have the attention of Sauron right now. What we need to do is march out with as much people as we can, march straight to the Black Gates and call him out. And that's what they do. They try to put as many people together as they can. They get about 7,000, which is like a paltry force, really, compared to the troop counts of past battles in history. And they travel up to the Black Gates. They lose about 1,000 soldiers because of fear and concern. And Aragorn says, look, if you're not up to it, you can go home. It's okay. I'm not going to hold it against you. And a lot of them do. But they get to the Black Gates, and the gates open, and this man comes out and reveals himself to be the Mouth of Sauron, one of his chief lieutenants, and confronts them about spies and shows them one of the Barrow swords and one of the elven cloaks of Lorien and Frodo's mithril shirt. And sort of there's a real suspense there, but then a real despair that the enemy has captured Frodo. They've lost, because if you remember, where we left Frodo in the Two Towers he was captured after he had been paralyzed by Shelob. And so this is the next sort of we're hearing of Frodo, is this lieutenant of Sauron coming out with Frodo's stuff. And so despair sort of falls on everyone, but Gandalf goes up and snatches it away and takes the stuff back and says, like, we're still gonna fight. There's nothing you can do about it. And that ends the first half of this section. And then, much like in the Two Towers, we then go to the Sam and Frodo perspective. So the suspense of how do they catch Frodo? Frodo is dead. Do they have the ring now? Well, let's jump back to Sam's POV and find out what really happened. So this book, I mean, the Two Towers as well, but this book really shows Sam to be to me the hero of the book. I don't really like Frodo in the films that much, but I think it is sort of, the films are true to the book in that even though Frodo is the hero, Sam feels like so much more heroic. Maybe it's because he is the everyman, he's the blue-collar worker, but the self-sacrifice and the absolute selflessness that Sam goes through is crazy. So Sam's found out that Frodo's alive, he's just paralyzed, but he's been taken to this tower by these orcs. What's he going to do? He eventually finds his way into the tower, and it turns out, because Frodo had this mithril shirt, all of the orcs, which are from different tribes and have different loyalties, a big fight is broken out. And so they've all killed each other except for a handful of orcs that are left in the tower. And so Sam manages to go in and free Frodo, and then begins their sort of long journey through Mordor to the to Mount Doom. And it's pretty bleak, it's pretty grim. They at one point get caught up in a troop of marching orcs. So all of Mordor is being emptied and heading north to the Black Gate. And Frodo and Sam are dressed up like orcs, so they sort of get taken along and force marched. But they manage to escape and continue on their own, alone, to Mount Doom. And of course, there's the beautiful moment when Frodo just cannot go anymore, and Sam's like, well, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. And somehow through like superhuman strength, super hobbit strength, picks up Frodo onto his back and carries him partway up the mountain. And it's so tragic, but knowing what's coming, and it's still just, you're on the edge of your seat. And they finally get up to the top of Mount Doom, and of course who is up there but Gollum. And Gollum attacks Sam and manages to fight him off for a bit, but Frodo runs on ahead, and Sam rushes into Frodo, and he's there in the very cracks of Mount Doom with the fire beneath him. And Frodo looks to Sam and he says, like, you know, I'm not going to do it. I changed my mind. The ring is mine. I'm going to keep it. And he puts the ring on, which, I mean, that says so much. Like, Tolkien's writing this story about good and evil and about sort of overcoming evil, but the ring itself, which represents power, the lust for power that people have, even the very strongest of people and the very sort of noblest and the very humblest, even someone like Frodo Baggins, a hobbit from the Shire, cannot win over this lust, this need for power. So in the end, even it defeats him, which I think is a powerful, powerful statement. And of course, the reader, you feel so much despair at that point. He's put the ring on, and as he puts the ring on, of course, Sauron's immediately aware that, whoa, the ring that I've been searching for this whole time is actually behind me in Mount Doom. My fate hangs by a thread now. If I don't get that back, if it somehow falls in the fire, I'm done. And then, of course, this whole time, everyone's been preventing the death of Gollum, saying, like, well, he could redeem himself, or he could have some part left to play. And it turns out, of course, he does. He rushes in and jumps on the back of Frodo, who's invisible, bites his finger off, and has his ring back. Gollum has the ring, finally. And so he's celebrating, and he's jumping around, and as he does, he slips and falls into the fire, and the ring is destroyed. Now, again, comparing with the films have this beautiful moment where Frodo sort of falls and is holding onto a rock, and he's about to fall into the fire, and Sam's begging him, like, don't you dare let go. And Frodo's shaking his head like, look, after everything we went through, just let me end it. And Sam's like, will not let him. He's like, don't you dare. Then he reaches up and Sam pulls him up. That's an amazing moment in the films, but it doesn't happen in the books. They run out of the mountain. They sort of collapse on the mountainside, and Frodo says, you know, I'm glad to be with you, Samwise Gamgee, here at the end of all things. And it's just this beautiful moment, and they sort of pass out in each other's arms. And then we jump back to the battle. So there's this huge battle happening with the forces of Gondor and Rohan and everyone outside the Black Gates. And there's sort of that pause when Sauron detects the ring inside Mount Doom. And so he focuses all his attention on that. The armies sort of become disorganized. The Nazgul all fly back towards the mountain, which, by the way, the eagles have shown up to sort of have some sort of so the good guys have an air force to fight the Nazgul, but the Nazgul all rush back. Mount Doom's erupting, and with the lava and rocks falling, it destroys the remaining Nazgul. And then Gandalf says, like, behold, the end is near, or something, and they witness as the ring is destroyed, and the Tower of Barad-dûr of Sauron collapses, and all the fortresses in the Black Gate, it all collapse as their foundations are destroyed by the power of the ring being destroyed. And I think in the films, again, there's a scene where Merry and Pippin are shouting Frodo's name because they're sort of aware that Frodo's in this mess of this collapsing realm, but that's not in the books. And in fact, Merry doesn't go with them. So Merry sort of had his battle on the fields of Pelennor, and he stayed in the Houses of Healing, but Pippin has come, and so this is sort of Pippin's moment, which Pippin gets knocked out, and it's revealed later that Gimli sort of looks after him and brings him back. But Gandalf then says to the eagles, like, look, I know I'm asking a lot of you, and I know you're not my pets, but if you can, we need to get over there as quickly as we can. And so the eagles like, yeah, sure, come on, let's go. And they fly towards Mount Doom and find Frodo and Sam and manage to bear them away and take them back to Ithilien. And that's where they wake up, in Ithilien, outside of, or on the other side of the Anduin. And then they're victorious, and Aragorn is sort of taken his role over as king. He's going back to Minas Tirith to be coronated, and yeah, everything's going well. There is a really beautiful scene where, or sequence of scenes back in Minas Tirith where Éowyn has come to, and she's like raring to go to battle, but she's still kind of wounded, and the healers won't let her leave, and she's really upset. She's like, take me to whoever's in charge of the city. So they take her to Faramir's sort of come to, and he sort of instantly falls in love with her, but she's sort of looking out for Aragorn. She still sort of has a thing for Aragorn. There was another scene with her earlier when Aragorn left to the paths of the dead, where she really wanted to go with him, and he had compassion and understanding, but he could not let her abandon her duty as a shield maiden of Rohan to protect the Rohirrim that she had been tasked with. But over time, this sort of romance between Éowyn and Faramir blossoms, and they fall in love, and she doesn't change her mind and decide, oh, I'll take, if I can't get the king of Gondor, I'll get the steward instead. Like, it does kind of feel like she settles for him, but I don't want to believe it like that. She sort of says that she's hasn't changed her mind, but she's sort of realized her mind and realized her heart and what she really wants. And so they fall in love. And to me, it's really romantic, and sort of romance in Tolkien, like Beren and Luthien and Arwen and Aragorn. And to me, those are just sort of perfect, beautiful romances, and this is no different. And so the king returns to Minas Tirith. He is coronated outside the city, and he goes inside, and yeah, they sort of live happily ever after. The white tree that had been dead for centuries, Gandalf and Aragorn find another sapling of it and replant it. Gimli and Legolas go back to their homes and bring a whole bunch of elves and dwarves down to sort of rebuild Minas Tirith and make it this beautiful city. And the rest of the Fellowship, they're sort of waiting around, and they don't really know what they're waiting for, but eventually Elrond, Galadriel, Celeborn, Arwen, all of the elves show up and have a wedding, and Arwen finally marries Aragorn. And so great celebrations, and then they have to start heading back, and of course they take the body of Theoden, and they head back to Rohan to bury him, and they have a funeral for Theoden, and then they keep going to Isengard, and they find out that Treebeard has sort of let Saruman go because he doesn't really have any power, and Treebeard doesn't like caging living beings, so he had let him go. And that's where Aragorn and Arwen head back to Minas Tirith, and there's this sort of really tragic parting between Arwen and Elrond, who of course will never see each other again, because Arwen has chosen her father, half-elven, she's as well half-elven, she's chosen to sort of live a mortal life to be with her husband. And a really sort of heartbreaking moment for the two of them. But the rest of the company continues on, and they actually come across Saruman as sort of this old beggar in the woods, and Wormtongue's with him as sort of this beaten slave. And Saruman's like really nasty to them, and they just sort of leave him alone. They try to offer him a compassion, but he's having none of it, and he wanders off. And they get back to Rivendell. Bilbo's still there. He's like 129 or something crazy, and but he's really old at this point because the ring has been destroyed, and so he's sort of aged rapidly very quickly. He gets them to tell him all about their adventures and writes a lot of it down, but eventually gives all the notes and stuff to Frodo and says, you'll have to finish this. And then the elves leave them, and Frodo leaves Rivendell for the last time. But Elrond says, like, in a couple of years, we might see each other again, sort of mysteriously. And so just the four hobbits and Gandalf head west towards the Shire, and they get to Bree. They notice things aren't really going so well. There's sort of dark rumors, and something sort of is afoot, and it's not all going to be good and happy. And Gandalf leaves them at the Bree. He's decided he's going to go have a long chat with Tom Bombadil, which I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. But so Gandalf leaves them at the Old Forest and says, like, look, there's going to be something going on in the Shire, but you guys are going to have to deal with it yourselves. So you're grown up now. My role is done. I defeated Sauron. I'm not going to mess in affairs anymore. You guys are more than capable. Deal with it yourself. And so they get back to the Shire and find it not as they had left it. Now, I think Tolkien himself explicitly stated that this is not sort of his... sort of an allegory for soldiers from the First World War returning to Britain and finding it a much different place than they had left it, but it fits so perfectly that I can't help but think that subconsciously he must have put that in there. But they get back to the Shire, and it's sort of idyllic, quiet, peaceful life has been totally changed. There are these sort of gangs of thugs that are going around taking everyone's food, and there are these rules that everyone has to follow, and sort of strict rationing and curfews and all kinds of horrible, horrible stuff. And of course, the four hobbits are just like laughing at it. They're like, well, I'm not following these rules. What are you talking about? You can't tell me what to do. And these hobbits trying to arrest them, and they're like, what do you mean arrest us? Like, we get swords, you do not. Like, what power do you have? And they're like, no, we have to follow the rules, or we'll get in trouble with the chief and whatnot. And it turns out that it has been Saruman and sort of his thugs that had sort of taken over the Shire, and these four hobbits, they're having none of it. Pippin goes down to the Tooks, who the Tooks have been putting up a fight and been resilient, and he sort of raises them, and they all sort of go their own way and call all these hobbits together and lead them in sort of a couple battles to rout these evil men and win back the Shire, which they do. And then they find Saruman himself, and he's the chief who's been running this whole thing, and he's sort of very petty. He's like, I did this whole thing to try and ruin your home for you, just like you ruined mine, and no matter what you do, it'll take you generations to get back the Shire that you left, because they've cut down trees, they've dug up hobbit holes, they've built these factories. Like, there's this one mill that's described that it's very industrial, it's spouting smoke, this great ugly brick building, like I said at the very start. So Tolkien's a very conservative person in that he wants to conserve a peaceful pre-industrial past, and the Shire's now become this sort of industrial wasteland. And so they banish Saruman. They're like, we don't want to kill. Frodo's very much like, I don't want to kill if we don't have to, and sends him on his way. But Wormtongue, who's taken abuse for too long, jumps up and cuts the throat of Saruman, and then as he's running away, he gets shot down. All the hobbits can shoot him before Frodo can say anything. So Grima dies, and Saruman, sort of his body shrivels up into like a skeleton. He collapses into a heap. And with that, the Shire is sort of freed again, but there's much work to do. And then the sort of following chapters are, or the following pages are the hobbits sort of rallying together to sort of tear down all those buildings and rebuild the Shire as well as they can. And Sam makes use of his gift from Galadriel. So in the Fellowship of the Ring, he had been given a box of sort of special dust, soil, or what have you, plus a single seed of a Malorn tree, these beautiful elven trees from Lorien. And he takes this pinches of this dust and sprinkles it on all these trees, and then he finally plants the seed in the field where the party tree had grown. At the start of the book, there's this party tree where Bilbo's party was, that these thugs had ripped this tree down and left it to rot. And over the course of the winter, the following spring, the elven magic has made the Shire a really beautiful place again. And all these trees are growing up super, super quickly, and the produce is overwhelming that year. And it's everything seems to be going well. But of course, and I haven't really mentioned this, but Frodo, when they're heading back to the Shire, passing Weathertop, he's feeling that pain from being stabbed in the shoulder again. And on the anniversary of when he was stabbed by Shelob and paralyzed with her venom, he gets really sick, and so he sort of says like that those wounds will never fully heal, and he's still sort of suffering from what he's experienced in the war. And that, to me, that's sort of a metaphor for like shell shock or PTSD, right? That I'm sure Tolkien would have, if not experienced himself, would have known many people who had gone through that after the First World War. And how even though everything is green and bright and happy again and the world is saved and evil has been vanquished, there's still that pain that he's going to carry with him for the rest of his life. And then the final chapter is Frodo saying, hey Sam, we've got one more adventure to do. Can you take a couple weeks off and come with me? Because Sam, by the way, has gotten married at this point to Rosie Cotton, and he's had a kid that he's named Eleanor. Anyways, he's like, yeah, sure, Frodo. Like, he assumes he's going back to Rivendell to stay with Bilbo. So Frodo gives him the book of all of Bilbo's writings and the adventures that Frodo had written, this red book, which is kind of like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and tells him, like, Sam, the last few pages are for you. So it seems like goodbye, but Sam just assumes he's going to Rivendell. But then they meet Elrond, Galadriel, and Bilbo, and it's revealed that they're going to the Grey Havens. They're going to sail across into the west. And Sam's really heartbroken. Like, he's got to say goodbye to Frodo. He's loved Frodo. Absolutely. And when they get there, Gandalf's there as well. Gandalf's going to go on the boat as well. And Gandalf has told Merry and Pippin, so Merry and Pippin show up as well. They're not going away, but they'll be there so that Sam doesn't have to walk home alone. And yeah, so Frodo and Bilbo, these two ring bearers, pass away to the west with Gandalf, whose task is now complete, and the elves. And it sort of ends with a description of Frodo sort of seeing the lands of Valinor in the west, this sort of kind of like a heaven, a paradise where all turns to silver glass and passes away, and then white shores and rolling green hills, and sort of this eternal rest that Frodo's now going to get to experience. And then we follow Sam, and he heads back home, and just like in the book, he gets back to his family and his kid, and he sits down and he says, "Well, I'm back," and that's it. That's the final line of the story, and it's to me just a perfect ending. Beautifully wraps up the whole story. And like I said, there is appendices that sort of tell of what happens afterwards, like how Pippin becomes the Thane of the Shire, and Meriadoc becomes the Master of Buckland, and Sam becomes the mayor 15 times running, and how Merry and Pippin, they get married and they have kids, and when Pippin's wife dies, he goes with Merry. I think it is when his wife dies, but he goes with Merry down to Rohan, and they see Éomer right before Éomer dies, and they head down to Gondor, where they pass away as well and are buried with honor in Gondor. And Aragorn, of course, has a kid and lives another 100 years, and then eventually he too lays down and dies. And Arwen returns to Lorien, where they first sort of proposed to one another and made this plan to get married, and sort of lives out the remainder of her days there and passes away. And Sam himself, when Sam's wife passes away, he goes down to his daughter, who's living with her husband and family now, and gives her the book, and then heads to the Havens himself and takes the last boat out, or one of the last boats out, because he too was a ring bearer, even if for a short time, and so he's hopefully reunited with Frodo out there somewhere, Gandalf and Bilbo. And then our final two members of the fellowship are, of course, Gimli and Legolas, and it tells how they did what they said they were going to do. They visit the caves together in the forest, and both of them are just overwhelmed by the natural beauty and whatnot. And then finally, because ever since the battle at the ports where Legolas had first seen the sea, he sort of felt that longing for the sea that all elves feel, and so he finally builds a boat himself and sets out to sail for the west. And it's sort of hinted that, or rumored that, Gimli has gone with him, and so the last two Fellowship of the Ring members pass away from the world. But that's all sort of appendice stuff, sort of outside the story, but kind of wraps up everything for you. So that's the Lord of the Rings. Wow, I really, really like this last book. To me, it was the best by far. So much joy and emotion and nostalgia, and like I said, Lord of the Rings has to be one of the most influential things in my life growing up with that. But now I've finished my reread. I'm sure I'll come to it again, and I've got lots more to read. I'd like to read the Silmarillion once again. But for now, that was Tolkien's Return of the King, the final part of the Lord of the Rings.